Welcome to Issues That Matter. I'm Cynthia Pooler. My guest today is Scott Ritter. And if any of you are wondering why I've been away for a month, I got into a serious automobile accident. I wound up in the hospital with 9 broken ribs and internal injuries, but I'm on the mend again, and I'm back with my good old friend Scott. And we're gonna give an update on the war in Ukraine. So, Scott, it's been quite a while since we talked about this. So, update us since our last conversation.
Well, I mean, it's pretty much more of the same. I think when we last talked, the Russians and the Ukrainians were engaged in a death match in the vicinity of Bakhmut. They've been Solodar when we last spoke, with the same area, same battle. It's advanced. The Russians are advancing. They're threatening the Ukrainians with encirclement. The Ukrainians are pouring reinforcements into the area, and this is turning out to be potentially one of the most decisive battles of the war. I've been saying for some time now that it's my assessment that the Ukrainians cannot win. I've cited military math to make that argument, that they run out of resources, they run out of manpower. And what's happening, I think, is that the analysis from other areas are starting to back this up. We had the Secretary General of NATO come out, Jens Stoltenberg, and acknowledge that Ukraine will run out of artillery ammunition sometime in the summer. And when you're in an artillery-driven war and you run out of artillery ammunition, it means the war is over. China has come out, and their elite military academy has run the same numbers, and they've come to the same conclusion that Ukraine loses this conflict sometime this summer. And it appears that the mainstream media is starting to wake up to this reality. You see the Washington Post, for instance, running a major story about how bloody this battle is for Ukraine. So I think what we're looking at is the final stages of what will probably be the major battle of this war. If you're a historian and you've studied World War II, this might be the equivalent of the Battle of Kursk in the summer of 1943, where the Germans basically expended the totality of their strategic reserves. And when they lost that battle, they were never able again to constitute sufficient military power to threaten the defeat of the Soviets. A Soviet victory from that point on became inevitable. There's a lot of fighting left, a lot of casualties. And if Bakhmut falls, there will be a lot of fighting left and a lot of casualties. But the bottom line is there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Another major development is that China is stepping up to the plate on the heels of a major diplomatic victory that was scored by Chinese diplomats in bringing Saudi Arabia and Iran together, normalizing relations between these two longtime regional enemies. China now appears to be attempting to do a similar brokering of peace between Russia and Ukraine. We have the Chinese leader, President Xi Jinping, getting ready to fly to Moscow, where he will have discussions with Vladimir Putin, the Russian president. And then he will hold a video conference with President Zelensky. And I think when you assess the fact that China's putting its national prestige on the line, the prestige of its leader, they wouldn't commit to something like this unless they felt there was a pretty good chance of success, at least putting something on the table that was viable. And I think the Ukrainian leader, when confronted with the fact that just about everybody says he's losing this war and he can't win this war and there's nothing that can happen, who knows, there might be a chance for peace here. There might be a chance for an early peace. I mean, if Ukraine turns this potential Chinese diplomatic gambit down, then they're just basically setting themselves up for an execution, because then Russia will just go forward with this war, and this war will be over, as I said, sometime at the end of the summer. Hopefully, China will be able to convince Ukraine and its allies that that's the best option they can hope for. There's no other option. Choose peace and live, or choose war and die.
Okay, when you say Ukraine and its allies, besides the United States, who are its allies?
Europe and NATO are its allies.
Okay.
We know that NATO is, that Jan Stoltenberg has called this an existential struggle for NATO, that if Russia wins, NATO loses. And there are non-NATO European entities such as Sweden and Finland who are providing military assistance. So we're in the European Union has stepped up and talked about a common European Union policy, which goes beyond simply NATO. And then the group of seven economic powers, which of course includes non-European, non-NATO members, but the core members of which are NATO countries, have likewise sided with Ukraine on this conflict. So it's, we speak of the United States, we speak of NATO, we speak of the European Union, we speak of the G7, when we speak of the collective West that is confronting Russia in Ukraine, using Ukraine as a proxy.
In some of our previous conversations, you mentioned we were 1 second away from doomsday. Is that still a reality?
Yesterday, a US MQ-9 Reaper drone aircraft was downed off the coast of Crimea after violating Russian no-fly zones and carrying out intelligence collection operations that the Russians deemed to be sensitive. The fact that that aircraft is down now, the United States has to consider how to respond. Do they send another drone up, this time with a combat fighter escort? Do they stop sending drones up there by emboldening Russia to maybe carry out more aggressive actions against U.S. resources? The bottom line is there's a real possibility that the United States and Russia could end up shooting at each other. And once that happens, there's a real possibility that this could escalate to a nuclear conflict. There's no such thing as nuclear war. So we come back to what I said all along. We're less than a second away from midnight. One stupid mistake, one error of judgment, and we could find ourselves in a nuclear conflict, and none of us will survive.
In my time in the hospital, I was flipping the stations quite a bit, and MSNBC, of course, was talking pro-Ukrainian, and they were saying, we're helping them for democracy in the Ukraine, and then they talked about January 6th and how that was a big lie. But what they're perpetrating on MSNBC is a bigger lie. It's bigger than January 6th. This could annihilate the whole world. I can't imagine so many people in a position to lie like this. What do you think?
Well, it's the easiest lie in the world to tell, because you're lying about Russia, and most Americans don't know anything about Russia. We're ignorant of Russia, therefore we are susceptible to, being influenced by misinformation. And MSNBC is one of the largest dispensers of misinformation. They're horrible. Maddow is right up there with the worst propagandists in history in terms of spewing lies about Russia. While you were in the hospital, I had the opportunity to go to Washington, D.C. and meet with the Russian ambassador. And I had several conversations with him about arms control, about potential of bettering U.S.-Russian relations. And one of the things that we both agreed upon was the role played by Russophobia in creating this dangerous environment where Americans view Russia as an enemy, where the Americans view Russia as a threat. And this is absolutely the case. I mean, if Americans would just stop listening to what people who have an agenda that's built around the notion of militarily confronting Russia Stop listening to them and start formulating your own opinions. I'm not here to tell you what to think. I mean, if at the end of the day you've assessed all you can assess about Russia and you feel that Russia is evil and a threat, and that's your opinion, and I respect your opinion. Disagree with it, but at least I can say that's not Rachel Maddow's opinion. You came up with that. But most Americans can't say I have deep, strongly held convictions about Russia because you don't know anything about Russia. Not a darn thing. You can start by, going on TV and watching Russian movies from the Second World War. We like to watch American movies, and we're getting imbued with patriotism. But by comparison, the Russian movies are deep. They're soul searching. They're intellectual, and you learn a lot about the Russians by watching them because they're not flag waving, chest thumping, warmongering movies. These are movies about human beings. And I'd say start watching that, and if you watch it on YouTube, you can get it with closed caption. So you can watch and understand. Start appreciating Russian art. Right now there's a trend to ban Russian literature in institutions. So people can't do what I did in college: study Dostoevsky, study Tolstoy, study Lermontov, study Pushkin. I'm not claiming to be anybody who knows me knows that I'm not anybody who claims to be this most erudite intellect in the world. But at least I tried. At least I tried. At least I gave it a shot, and I'm glad I did because it opened my eyes. It's complex stuff, and again, you get tremendous insight into the Russian psyche, the Russian mind, and once you learn about the Russian people, you're not going to fear them because you realize they're just as human as you are. They have the same desires as you do. And therefore, all the idiots that are out there talking about the need to go to war against Russia are just that, idiots. If you want to save America, do what's best for America. If you want to preserve the world so that your children and grandchildren can live free of the fear of nuclear conflict, then you got to overcome Russophobia. And this is, to me, one of the biggest threats out there. Is this wall of ignorance that's generated by this irresponsible Russophobia that matches or exceeds the nonsense of the McCarthy era. I mean, it's funny how when you speak of history, you can say McCarthy to most Americans, they'll say, yeah, that was the Red Scare, Joseph McCarthy. Yeah, he was wrong. He was wrong. Yeah. How come you can accept that Joseph McCarthy was wrong back in the 50s? Today, you buy into anything that Rachel Maddow says. She's worse than Joseph McCarthy, 10 times worse.
Mm-hmm. So your prediction for the next few months?
Heavy fighting, tremendous losses, continued Russian victory, confusion on the part of the United States, confusion on the part of NATO about how to proceed. There will be a lot of talk about the need to send weapons to Ukraine. We saw Lloyd Austin is back in Germany at Ramstein at the Ukraine Contact Group, talking about the need to send in tanks quickly. Why? Why quickly, Mr. Austin? Because Ukraine's losing the war. And the fact is, this is a race to see what can happen first. Can Russia strategically defeat the Ukrainian army before NATO can once again resupply it and refit it? My money's on the Russian horse in this case. I think they're going to defeat the Ukrainian army faster than NATO can resupply it. But the next couple of months, we're going to be seeing an awful lot of talk about the need to get new, better, and more weapons in the hands of the Ukrainians in order to give them a fighting chance against Russia.
Neither you or I have a crystal ball, but let's say everything you're saying comes to pass and the Ukrainians lose this. Zelensky loses this. How do you think the U.S. media is going to spin a loss as far as Ukraine is concerned?
I have a crystal ball. Yeah. Look, the U.S. media is an adjunct of the U.S. government. So the U.S. media will be doing the government's job of spinning. That's their job. And so I think we're going to be seeing competing stories. One, there's going to be a continued desire to portray the Ukrainians as heroic, standing up against the irrepressible might of the Russian threat. So you're going to see stories about that. But I mean, I hate to be grim here, but as the sources of the reporting die, because a lot of these guys are Ukrainian soldiers that are, being taken off the battlefield to speak in front of a camera, they're going to die. So you won't have any more sources. It'll be sort of difficult to explain to your viewing audience why the brave Ukrainian hero that was out there talking about the inevitability of Ukrainian victory is now 6 feet under, or worse, just a rotting corpse abandoned someplace on a battlefield nowhere in Ukraine, because that's what's going to happen. Then the other one is to start telling the truth, similar to what the Washington Post has just recently done about the large number of casualties. And I also think that people are going to start turning on Zelensky. A key aspect to bringing this war to an end is going to be the fate of Volodymyr Zelensky and his family. I hope, for the sake of the wife and the kids, who I don't blame for the sins of the father or the husband, that they can leave Ukraine peacefully and they're able to resettle someplace. And if there is the need for legal retribution against any crimes Zelensky may have committed, then he has to be held to account. If he's found innocent of that, I hope he can live a quiet life, raising his children and loving his wife, and never again torturing the people of Ukraine with his failed vision of leadership. But he is failing, and if he stays in Ukraine, I think he's going to die. He'll either die as a direct result of Russian military action, or he'll die as a result of political instability engendered by the failures of his policy and the failures of his war. And somebody, probably an army officer, will kill him.
He was born in Ukraine, am I correct?
He was born in Ukraine.
Okay, what's in it for him to side with the United States and NATO?
What's in it for him? I mean, he's the Ukrainian leader, first of all, regardless of what we think of him in terms of the quality of the man and his background. He's a comedian. He's not trained to be a politician, trained to be an actor. He is the leader of Ukraine. He was elected president by the Ukrainian people. And as such, there's no doubt in my mind that he feels he has a moral, ethical, and historic obligation to lead Ukraine at this time. It's just that he doesn't have the skill set to do this. He's been managed by others. He's literally the modern day version of Pinocchio, the little boy carved out of wood, that everybody controls with sin. You say, what's his motivation? His motivation is that maybe maybe Geppetto will turn him into, Geppetto being the United States, find a way to have a magic angel come down and turn him into a real boy, and Zelensky become a real man. It isn't going to happen. He's just going to be this pile of wood who tells lies. His nose grows bigger, and eventually he's going to suffer the fate of all wooden boys who lie, and rot, be burned, or otherwise perish. What's in it for him now is survival. He's literally fighting for his life, and the United States is his lifeline in either event. Either the United States steps up and provides the military assistance necessary to enable Ukraine to more effectively defend against the Russians, or the United States provides him with safe haven and sanctuary, a place he can run to in order to save his life, because I don't think he has a future as the leader of Ukraine.
Last week on MSNBC, I saw an interview with Mrs. Zelensky and Hillary Clinton. I said, boy, that's a pretty picture.
Yeah. Look, again, wives get a tremendous amount of latitude, and I don't like to pick on wives. They're in a very difficult position of having to support, their husband and support their country. And she's doing that which she believes is necessary to accomplish that task. And Hillary Clinton is a ally of Joe Biden, a prominent voice in the Democrat Party. And as such, from Mrs. Zelensky's standpoint, she's somebody that is necessary to further the cause of her husband, the cause of Ukraine. I can't condemn Mrs. Zelensky for failing to know Hillary Clinton like we know Hillary Clinton. And I say we, remember, fully 50% of the country will probably support her still. So
Right.
it's not as though we have a unified vision in America about how bad Hillary Clinton are. There's many Americans out there that'll take her over Donald Trump. She
Mhm.
did, after all, win more votes in the 2016 election. Donald Trump won through the Electoral College. He didn't win by the popular vote. The popular vote, she trounced him. So, as much as I dislike her and oppose policies that she's come up with, we have to be realistic. And there's many Americans who do like her and who are in favor of her policies. So from Mrs. Zelensky's standpoint, sitting down with Hillary is not a bad decision. She's in a desperate strait. And here's a woman who can pull the strings in the Democratic Party and hopefully get the United States to continue to provide support to her husband and to her country. Why not meet with her? It's a logical decision.
So what's on the agenda for Scott Ritter? What are you up to?
I'm doing the same. I continue to write, and right now my book is being published in Russia, and there's a good chance that I'll be going sometime in May to Russia to carry out a book tour, and I'll take advantage of that opportunity to try and promote increased dialogue between Russians and Americans, citizen diplomacy. I no, I don't want anybody to invoke, I forget the name of that law that citizens cannot engage in private diplomacy.
Right. Wasn't that the Logan Act?
The Logan Act, there it is, the Logan Act. Yeah, so I'm not in violation of the Logan Act. I'm not going there trying to represent myself as a representative of the United States government. I'm going there as an American citizen. There was a piano player, Van Cliburn, back in the 1950s, who entered the Tchaikovsky Music Festival. Tchaikovsky, by the way, a famous Russian composer, was born in the city of Votkinsk, and that's where I actually went. It's where the missile factory was. So I'm familiar with not only his works, growing up listening to, and again, I asked just American to reflect on. I don't know. I mean, today it's different. We have so many TV channels and everything, but I just remember as a kid growing up, and at Christmas time, the Nutcracker Suite was on TV, and we
Right.
always watched the Nutcracker Suite. And there's different variations of it. You have the cartoon, you have the puppets, then they had the ballet. I mean, and I remember, you'd watch it in the music of the Nutcracker Suite. And then the same thing, Swan Lake would be on. You'd watch that, and then I got to see, where he was born. Got to go to the museum that was his childhood home, and so he developed this appreciation for it. But there was a music festival, the Tchaikovsky Music Festival, International Music Festival, and this young kid from Texas, Van Cliburn, entered it, and apparently he just wowed the Soviet audience with his skills. I mean, they were just blown away, literally blown away. And at that time, the Cold War was real, and there was a Soviet composer, Sostakovich, who famous composer, and he was the lead judge. He was like, everybody's going, Van Cliburn, Van Cliburn. He's like, man, I can't let an American win this. So he went up to Khrushchev. He said, hey, boss, everybody's picking Van Cliburn. And Khrushchev went, well, was he the best? And he said, yeah. And he said, give him the prize. And Van Cliburn got the prize. And that began this whole thing about, reaching out to, humans reaching out to humans and stuff like that. And if there would be a way to use this book tour to, even at just a little bit on the fringe, replicate what Van Cliburn accomplished, that would be amazing. There was another a great movie, Queen's Gambit. I don't know if you saw it, about chess playing. But at the end, the star of the film, this American girl who won the chess match against the great Russian chess master. In the end, they're going to take her out, and she's supposed to go back to the United States and be feted and wined and dined, and she's a hero. But instead, she wandered the park in Moscow where all the old men sit there and play chess. And here it is, this world famous girl sat down and started moving chess pieces with your average Russian. That's what we need. We need the average people to sit down with other average people and just start moving chess pieces around, having fun, relaxing, talking, engaging, enjoying the day. And if you do that enough, every time some idiot in Washington, D.C. or God forbid Moscow starts talking about aggressive policies against the other, yeah, you can look up and say, no, we don't want that. That's not what we want. We want to play chess with our counterparts, the Americans or the Soviets or the Russians. We want to listen to music. We want to, look at art. I mean, I've got this fantastic about the Peterhof, and I hope to be able to go there when I go to St. Petersburg and see it. I mean, it's just beautiful. Hopefully take my daughters with me and expose them to this, to see the Hermitage, to see, just the culture that is Russia, that it's there, hundreds of years of it. And in America, we're just shutting our minds out from it. We don't talk about it. We ignore it. We dismiss it. And in doing so, we're actually, closing the door for so much opportunity because, I think people who take the time to learn about Russia will learn to love Russia. And I would say the same about Russians. Russians who take the time to learn about America will learn to love America. And then maybe we won't need nuclear weapons now going forward.
So you have your book right in back of you.
I have the poster of it. Yes.
Oh. So how's your blog going?
It's going good. I've been writing some pieces that have gotten a lot of attention. ScottRitterExtra.com, and put it up there. And I just wrote a very personal piece about the conflict in Georgia and what's going on there. Georgia being the former Soviet Republic. My wife is from Georgia, and so there's a lot of family history there, and it's a very difficult situation there. And so I tried to put it in perspective. And some people who read it thought it was maybe my best article yet. So
good. That's great. So and you're give us a small synopsis of what your book is about. I think it's an important piece of literature for everybody to look at.
Well, thank you very much for that. I mean, Disarming the Time of Perestroika is just about that. It's about the implementation of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty that was signed by Mikhail Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan in December of 1987, and implementation began on July 1st, 1988. And it's a story of the treaty, the men and women who implemented the treaty, and it's a personal story because I mean, again, not because of any skill set that I possess, just luck, serendipity. I was actually one of the first people assigned to the on-site inspection agency. In fact, when the Marine Corps sent me in their efficiency, I reported on February 4th, thinking that was my report date. And I showed up and there was no one there because that was a Friday and everybody else was coming in on Monday. So I was the first person to check in. I checked in 2 days earlier, 3 days early, it seemed. But then so I was literally on the ground when this was created. I was the first inspector in the Soviet Union. I was sent to Votkinska, an advance party in June of 1988, so that when the clock ticked over 1 minute after midnight on July 1st, I was on the ground in the Soviet Union, the first inspector on the ground. So I'm pretty proud of these things, and I'm proud of the role that I played. I was at the center of a lot of the history that's taking place. So it's a fascinating story. You're not going to find that story told anywhere else. And I can guarantee you that just about everybody in your viewing audience doesn't know anything about it. You might have seen something, a little reference in the book. You have no clue what we did, how we did it, why we did it. This book tells you, and it's a fascinating story. It's truly a story of humans overcoming all obstacles. When I say humans, not just Americans, our Soviet counterparts, overcoming everything you could possibly imagine, from politicians to a crisis over, missiles being brought out at gunpoint, to mud, minus 70-degree freezing temperatures where we still had to go outside and install this thing, ticks, flies, mosquitoes. I mean, it was there. We talk about vaccines today, experimental vaccines. We had to get an experimental vaccine back then to fight against tick-borne encephalitis.
Oh,
One of the things I was called upon to do is we had to walk the perimeter of the factory to make sure there was no breaches of the factory, and it was a couple miles long. I think 3.5 miles was the the distance, but it was through swamps and over very difficult territory, and you were brushing into grass and all this stuff. And during tick season, you would literally come back covered with ticks,
Hmm.
and you'd have to get them off. But we needed to collect them once, so I had to put on this white coverall, and I walked and I collected the ticks, and they pulled 88 ticks off of me.
Oh my God.
That's the kind of crazy stuff that we were doing. But it's also a story about perestroika. It's the time of perestroika. So it talks about what was going on. When I arrived in June of 1988, that was right when Mikhail Gorbachev convened the 19th All-Party Union Conference. Now, for people who are rolling their eyes, say, well, that sounds pretty Soviet to me. It was. But it was actually one of the most important conferences that could be convened because it was about a revolution, literally a revolution. Mikhail Gorbachev was trying to convince the Communist Party that the old way didn't work and that the new way was to empower the people of the Soviet Union through democracy. And we got to watch democracy being born. I was an eyewitness to the very first elections that were held in the Soviet Union. I went to the polling place and bore witness to this phenomena that was occurring. And I got to watch the Soviet people be overjoyed with the prospects of a democracy, and then watch them to be crushed by the reality that the Soviet Union, Gorbachev, Communist Party wasn't ready for democracy. The imperfect implementation of perestroika and the economic damage that was done to the Soviet Union by this factory town whose economy depended on the production of missiles that we were now destroying. So they had no income. And to watch this town go from a place that had high standards of living to people who were unemployed restaurants that were once full of food, and suddenly we go and there's no food, and just to watch the political change that transpired there was fascinating. But it's also a story of hope. I'll leave you with this. We look at the situation today, and people say, "I can't imagine a time when Russian relations were ever worse." And I can say, well, they were in the 1980s. In the lead up to the INF Treaty, we had horrible relations with the Soviet Union. And yet, because of arms control, we were able to overcome that. We created the opportunity for both sides to sit down and talk themselves through some very difficult problems, eliminating the threat posed by nuclear weapons to both parties and creating an environment of peaceful cooperation. We squandered it, and here we are today, but we could do it again. And that's what I love about this book, is that you read this book, and what I hope you come back, I hope you say a couple things. One, wow, what a story. Two, I didn't know that. And three, this gives me hope that we could do this again. Sometimes history does repeat itself, and the repetition isn't bad. Sometimes when history repeats, it means we're repeating good things. In the case of today, I'd certainly like to see history repeat itself, to have the United States and Russia sit down once again and use arms control as the vehicle of not only reducing nuclear tension, but paving a path forward for better relations between the Russian people and the American people. So that's what the book's about.
And how can they get the book?
Buy it.
Hmm?
You can buy it at Clarity. The publisher is Clarity Press, so they have a website, claritypress.com. But if that's too complicated, just go to scottritterextra.com, and there's a link there. You can click it and buy it. You can go to Amazon and get it. You can go to Barnes and Nobles and get it. And soon, if you're in Russia, you can go to a Russian bookstore and get it.
Right. Scott, we shall be talking again. You've been listening to Scott Ritter. I'm Cynthia Pooler. This is, oh my God, Issues That Matter. Scott, thank you. And thank you, everybody, for listening. Have a great day.